Platner's the nominee in Maine. Barely any opposition, headlines still calling it a test, and Susan Collins waiting on the other side. Not exactly the clean launch a challenger wants.
This is Senate Pickup Watch, and the Maine primary is finally in the books.
Plus, a Democratic super PAC just dropped $2 million into Mississippi, part of a $50 million national push. We'll grade that one too.
And in Texas, there's a super PAC selling Republicans on what it calls permission to defect. We'll see if that's a voter model or just a donor pitch.
Let's start in Maine. Platner won. Fine. CBS says he faced minimal opposition. The Globe still frames the night as a test because the allegations never got resolved. So what exactly did voters ratify?
And here's the part that complicates it. The AP piece today says Defying Trump actually helps Collins. They frame it as a Collins-specific lever more than a generic Maine shift.
That blows up the 48-43 math. That UMass Lowell number never priced in Collins turning Trump defiance into an asset.
Right, and I want to stress test that. Is this just Collins, or is Maine's suburban-rural coalition wired differently? Because if it's Collins-specific, you can't export it to New Hampshire and call Pappas the same play. Flip the polling worry, too. All week we've said Collins gets undersold. Older rural men are hard to reach. If her defiance posture is what matters, that undercount might run the other way this cycle.
So the man with unresolved oppo in the can is up against an incumbent who's somehow raising her ceiling by fighting her own president. Good luck. Now Mississippi. $2 million for Scott Colom against Hyde-Smith as part of $50 million nationally. This is that marquee overwinnable pattern, now with an actual dollar figure attached. That's the tell. If you're spending $2 million in Mississippi while winnable recruits go underfunded, you're not buying the map that flips the chamber.
And the Texas pitch. Permission to defect. I want the actual voter model behind that phrase before I believe soft R Texans are persuadable. Consultant speak is cheap.
It always sounds great in the pitch deck. Show me the in-state money in the field, then we'll talk. From Yahoo News.
Washington. Democrat Graham Platner and GOP Senator Susan Collins will face off in a November contest that could determine which party controls the Senate next year, a race that was shaken up in recent weeks by a spate of allegations against Platner.
Okay, it's official. CBS calls it Platner's the nominee, and he had minimal opposition. The viability question we've been chewing on all week now runs straight into Collins. But here's what bugs me. He walks out with minimal opposition, and the headlines still call it a test. Because the primary itself barely tested him, the unresolved allegations did, and nobody settled them before tonight.
And I'd push back gently on the coronation read. Minimal opposition doesn't make it a mandate. A lot of voters were basically choosing from the ballot they had, with one live candidate on it. The bigger problem is who he's facing. Collins has been in the Senate since 1997. She chairs appropriations, and she's survived every tough cycle Democrats have thrown at her. You don't dislodge that with a working-class brand and unresolved oppo sitting out there.
Right, and Platner's whole pitch is that her independence is symbolic opposition. Cute line. Trouble is that symbolism is exactly what keeps her winning in a split-ticket state. From Patrick Whittle and Will Weissert at AP News.
But Collins has proven to be a hard target for Democrats over the years, even for candidates without the baggage of Platner, who has faced criticism for his relationships with women, inflammatory online posts, and a previous tattoo recognized as a Nazi symbol. Collins is seeking her sixth term with sky-high name recognition, a record-breaking run of consecutive Senate votes, and a history of bringing back federal funding for her state for years.
Here's what was sitting in my notes all morning. Platner comes out of a minimal opposition primary, and then AP hands Collins a real asset. She can defy Trump and raise her ceiling in Maine. That UMass Lowell 48-43 never priced in a Collins who gets more popular by crossing Trump. Add sky-high name recognition and that record-setting vote streak, and it's a tough number to out-organize.
But hold on, Sarah. I want to stress test the mechanism. Is this about Collins herself, or is Maine's suburban-rural coalition actually wired to absorb Trump defiance? Those are very different claims. Because if it's Collins-specific, and the AP frames it that way, with her record and her appropriations chairmanship, then you can't carry that logic into New Hampshire or anywhere else in New England and call it a regional trend.
And remember, Democrats already ran this play. Sarah Gideon last time, cleaner candidate than Platner, and Collins still beat her. Now they're back with a nominee carrying a Nazi symbol tattoo story into the fall.
Which flips something I flagged all week, the polling undercount. If older rural men are hard to poll and Collins's defiance plays with them, the bias could be undercounting Collins, not the challenger.
This one's from Boston Globe.
But after the events of the last 2 weeks, during which Platner faced fresh, damaging allegations about his past conduct, the primary contest is now serving as a potentially revealing data point for how effectively he is weathering the scrutiny and consolidating support.
So the Globe calls it a test. CBS calls it minimal opposition. Both can be true. Platner's the nominee, and with Mills suspended back in April, this was never a real fight. But what the Globe is really counting is the protest vote. Mills stayed on the ballot and reminded people of it on purpose. The number that matters is how many Democrats voted for an inactive candidate just to register a no on Platner.
Right, and that's the data point worth having. A challenger going into a general against Collins while carrying fresh allegations, you want to know what share of your own primary electorate flinched. The press wants to crown him today. I'd be asking whether Collins's Oppo shop just watched Maine Democrats hand them a soft underbelly to advertise against all fall.
And pair that with the AP read we just hit. Defying Trump helps Collins specifically. Platner leaves this without a clean launch. Unresolved allegations, and the most durable incumbent in the Senate waiting for him. From KWTX.
A bipartisan group of federal campaign operatives is launching a new super PAC in support of State Rep. James Talarico, the Democratic U.S. Senate nominee, with plans to hammer Republican standard-bearer Ken Paxton on his legal and ethical scandals. Moment of Truth PAC, according to the group's pitch to donors, plans to deploy rapid, large-scale advertising that gives Republicans permission to defect to Talarico and that makes the Austin Democrat safe for moderates.
So Moment of Truth PAC wants up to $62 million to give Texas Republicans, quote, permission to defect. The phrase that jumps out to me is make Talarico safe for moderates, even more than the Paxton attack, because that's an admission. They're saying Paxton scandals alone don't set the ceiling. The limit is whether a soft R voter can stomach pulling the lever for an Austin Democrat at all. That's a voter model question, not an ad-buy question.
Rich, the part I'd grade first is the floor. $41 million is their minimum viable, just to establish presence in Texas markets. That's the number that tells you how brutal the state is. You have to spend $41 to be visible at all. And notice who's writing this. Bipartisan operatives. A treasurer named Dane Waters going on record. This is a donor pitch dressed up as a launch. I want to see a dollar actually land before I treat it as infrastructure.
Right. Permission to defect is consultant poetry until somebody shows me the persuadable universe in Texas is real and not just a slide deck. Paxton, being the most scandal-ridden guy in recent memory, doesn't move a voter who's already decided Democrats aren't an option.
From Mississippi Today.
A Democratic political group announced on Tuesday that it will spend $2 million on Mississippi's U.S. Senate race between incumbent Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith and Democratic challenger Scott Colom, an effort that's part of a $50 million campaign targeting congressional races around the country.
Here's the dollar figure I've been waiting for all week. American Bridge is dropping $2 million on Colom against Hyde-Smith in Mississippi, part of a $50 million national buy. Mississippi. The marquee logic finally has a price tag.
Slow down, though. The name matters. Scott Colom's a DA, a district attorney out of the Golden Triangle. He's local. He's not some parachute candidate. So the question is bigger than whether Mississippi is movable. It's whether this specific guy fits the actual Mississippi electorate.
He fits the electorate Democrats wish existed, 2 million in a state where the party hasn't won a Senate seat in a generation, and they're calling it their largest paid media effort ever. Read me the in-state fundraising number before you tell me this is real.
But look at the message. Tariffs, the Iran war, Medicaid cuts. Baychok's pitch is working-class anger at Trump. That's the realignment play. The test is whether permission to defect actually moves soft R voters, or whether it just sounds great in a donor release.
And notice the list. Iowa, Alaska, North Carolina, Texas. Nearly 20 races. Spread 50 million that thin, and Mississippi starts to look like a map expansion line item, not a chamber-flipping bet.
Got a race we should be watching? A correction? Or a smarter way to read the map? Send it our way at SenatePickupWatch@lanternpodcasts.com. We really do read what you send. We've put links to every story from today's briefing in the show notes, so if one caught your ear, you can take a closer look there. That's Senate Pickup Watch for today. This is a Lantern podcast.